from one another and see how we can come together and actually build something that is strong with all of us here. So like I said earlier, I'm Marianne Muller. I am Indigenous, I'm Michif or Métis, and that is, I am of mixed descendant from European and First Nations. So originally in Canada, the land of the Métis is includes Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And now I've moved away. I currently live in Algonquin land, on Algonquin land in Ottawa, but right now I am in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and Kamloops. So I'm happy that I've been able to join the team here to host this session. So because I'm Michif, obviously I can't represent all Indigenous Fab Labs. I can speak to my own experience, I can speak to my knowledge, I can speak to my culture, but I can't represent everyone else. And there's Fab Labs, Indigenous Fab Labs everywhere in the world. I cannot speak to the different cultures, right? I know my own, but not everybody else's. So this is why we're here, so that everybody can have a space and to have a voice. So today I was hoping that we can take a moment to introduce ourselves. Because we're a small group, I think we have time to take a moment. I was going to suggest that we all go find an object in our home or in our workspace that has been handcrafted. It may be something that you've made yourself, or maybe something that you have received. It might be something that holds knowledge or not. It may be a traditional item or modern. Then use this object to describe what it is and introduce yourself using this object as a little bit of a icebreaker. So if we could maybe take a minute to go find an item, and let's be back here at in just a minute. Just waiting to see if Jean-Luc and Benno join us. Luis, and I'm sorry, Green Fab Lab, I didn't catch your name.
My name is Marcos Subieta. Sorry, I will change the picture and name in a few minutes, please.
No problem. So are we ready? Anybody wants to start? Oh, come on, we can't all be shy.
Kia ora, can everybody hear me? I'm just making sure my audio is going. Kia ora koutou, tēnei taku mihi, kia koutou, a whakarongo aki e ki te tangi o te manu, e rere runga rawa e ka tui tui tuia. Ha tuia ki runga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki tuia ki roto, kuia ki waho. Tuia te here tangata ka ronga te pō, ka ronga te ao, tui tui tuia. Kia ora koutou, my name's Hemi McGregor. I reside in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And it's about 5:30 in the morning and the kids are still sleeping, so that's good. My tribal affiliations are Ngāti Rākai Pāka, Ngai Tūhoi, Ngāti Ruapani, Pahawira, And so that they're all on the east coast of New Zealand towards about 6 hours from where I live. I didn't grow up there, but I grew up traveling back and forth to those places. I thought about a couple of items that are right close to me to grab, but I'm just going to redirect the camera to this work above my head there. It's about 1 meter across. It's a speaker made in timber, and it's a sort of simulation of a speaker. Its name is Te Kore Kore. In our narrative, we have a place called the void, of a place of unlimited potential. And so when you increase it by saying Te Kore Kore, it means the void with absolute nothingness in it. And that's what I look to for where things are created when I make, is about a mental and spiritual transition back into spaces of unlimited potential. So that's, as an educator, that's where I teach my students. And handmade, yes, but handmade with a grinder and I come from a family of engineers, so sort of jerry-rigged a lathe on a table out of an old washing machine engine, and a grinder, and yeah, went for it. So that's kind of a little bit of me, and that's just on the other side some of my mum's weaving, for going and collecting shellfish in the ocean. So she was one of my artistic influences. And so I guess philosophically around making is that it's a practice of connecting our awareness, our present and our past and our future together, all at that moment of creation. And sometimes I wonder if the outcome of seeing and enjoying is like a happy bonus. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Kia ora, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Hemi. That was great. It's unbelievable. I love the speaker. As an audiophile a little bit myself, I am in love with that piece. It represents so much. It's gorgeous. And the weaved baskets are beautiful. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but weaving is something that's very, very common in pretty much all Indigenous cultures. Like every single one of them seem to have their own weaving practices. So it's something that really connects each of us, and we can see that kind of in a metaphorical way as well, right? The weaving that brings us all together and creates something strong that carries knowledge, carries something. Well, it's wonderful. Who would like to go next?
So I can go. Hene hotu ima Jean-Luc Perite tisa. My name is Jean-Luc Perite from the Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana in the United States. And I'm also here at the North American Indian Center of Boston. This is our logo that's above my head. We are Massachusetts' oldest urban Indian center, or friendship center as called in Canada. It's context, but yeah, we serve so we call ourselves the North American Indian Center of Boston because we have peoples from First Nations that come to New England by way of James Treaty to live and work here. But there are also people that have had historical connections with the land that we're on right now, which is the traditional Indigenous territory of the Massachusetts Nation. For the piece that I picked from my surroundings, I have this sign here from one of our marches. This is calling for justice for one of our community members, Nanette Olson, who is Mi'kmaq. Indicative of missing and murdered Indigenous women. But definitely this is something that you know, it affects us with an urban context as well. So I just wanted to just bring that into mind in this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Christina, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Would you like to go next?
Thank you. First of all, to all of you, and out of respect, I will say that I'm not from an Indigenous community, but I was so delighted to see that this circle was happening. I am half Dutch and half Spanish, but I've had, I'm so grateful to have lived abroad in neither of those countries my whole life. I've worked with communities in Asia, concretely with Tibetan communities, lived a long time in Latin America as well, in the Middle East. And I guess that's what drew me to be very interested in how to support these local communities, those that are being affected by a lot of the risks of capitalism, of sprawling globalization. And I'm so grateful to see you, Beno and Jean-Luc. It was actually Jean-Luc who, when I gave a talk 2 years ago in the Fab conference, I was so delighted that the first question that came from the audience was yours, and you asked how the platform that we were announcing, Wikifactory, was going to support Indigenous communities. I was so delighted to hear that, because curiously, my master's thesis was about Indigenous environmentalism in international relations, something that I guess when I grew up in Latin America, I learned of the Indigenous struggle before I learned of European history, which is strange, perhaps out of the ordinary for a European. And I'm so grateful for that, because indeed, Jean-Luc, since then, I feel, and I hope already prior, for me, making sure that what we are building on Wikifactory can serve the Indigenous communities is the ultimate check and balance that I would like to serve as being co-founder of such platform. The thing that I'm holding that I want to show today is a bracelet from the Putumayo region of Colombia. It's the eye of the universe, and I'm holding in my feminine side, helping me connect with Pachamamita, which ultimately is what I give thanks to every day. So I'm very grateful that this circle is happening. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Christina, for being an ally, being there to support us, and recognizing some of the challenges that we face and what we represent beyond those challenges. You were saying that you've got a Dutch and Spanish background, and just a fun link for me. I currently also work at the National Gallery of Canada, and we have a show for Rembrandt at the moment at the National Gallery. And instead of showing Rembrandt by himself, we've decided to show Rembrandt in his context. So we talk a lot about Dutch history in terms of capitalism, enslavement, and trade with Indigenous people of Turtle Island. It's not all bad. Obviously, there's definitely some great things that happened. And there's the treaty that happened between the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee, with the two-row wampum that we have a replica of at the gallery. So I'm just happy to see that we've got a little bit of a link with through Rembrandt here. Who would like to go next?
Hello.
Hello.
Well, thank you so much for this initiative, Super Ariane. Very, very happy to share this space with you and these amazing people, Christina, Jean-Luc, Maestro Marcos, Luis, Emi. Well, I come from the Amazon rainforest in Peru, and I grew up with the Ashaninka community. Yeah, well, it was hard to me and to my family to move from this amazing context to cities, to capital, because terrorism. But this crisis also had a positive consequence. The positive consequence to me was discover new worlds, discover new cultures, etc., and come back to the jungle. But this come back to the jungle 20 years ago was really hard because even today we have not as many years ago, the opportunities still are not for all, are not for everybody. Most of the people in the jungle, most of the people, especially young people, don't want to be there. More than 90% of young people want to live. So we are losing our natural guardians of the Amazon rainforest. My special commitment is how could we create new platforms, new ways to empower local communities and to the future of technology. One of the huge contributors to the future of technology are communities, indigenous communities, because the knowledge, because the relationship with nature and sustainability. So facing this global climate change, this knowledge is not just it's not just a reference. It's the answers to many huge questions that we have today in the fields of the new technology. Face and all my efforts and my heart and my hands to any of the projects that you are doing today.
Thank you, Beto. I think that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about how, or haven't recently thought about how urbanization of Indigenous people actually pulls them away from their culture. That's something that's very, very present here in Canada, where our Indigenous youth are heading into the cities and disconnecting from their cultures and leaving their own territory. I recently watched a documentary about language and how by moving away from traditional territory and by moving away from traditional practices, there's a lot of language that's actually being lost because people are no longer doing it. And that kind of linked a little bit to an exhibit that was with basket weaving, where there was an absence of basket, demonstrating to the extent at which we're losing language because we are no longer doing what we traditionally did. So I hear the pain point that it is of having youth leave the space to go live into the cities looking for different opportunities.
I could be the next.
Yeah, go ahead, Marco.
Okay, my name is Marcos Vieta. I'm a Bolivian guy from La Paz. My family comes from a very, very small place named Suri. I am named that because we are in a straight line descendant from Pedro Domingo Murillo, who was a political leader who fights for independence. He was half Spanish, half indigenous, as me. And then my family lives over in that house for generations until the government, some 20 years ago, for historical purposes, gives my mother some cents and requests the house for make it a museum over there. Then we moved to La Paz, and from that point, there is a long history, but it is important to say that I became activist, an ecological activist, but I am no longer in that path because last period of last decade, I could say, was very, very hard for me in terms of the hostility that the government pressed against us for defending the places on the Amazonia, Tipnis mostly, which government tries to create roads and all that the cocaleros needs in order to grow more coca. So I decided to create a better approach to fight for underserved areas and indigenous people. And then I become a wannabe maker because I didn't consider myself as a maker yet. I am learning a lot, but I am still a wannabe. So, however, I decided to be part or to fund the Bolivia Fab Lab network. I failed for a lot of reasons. And then I decided to create the Green Fab Lab network, which is more aligned to my lifetime objects, goals. And then because the political struggle that has in my country, I just knocked the door of other people in neighbor countries. And in that way, we started a community. And we are working on that since that time. We have some nodes in Brazilian areas, and we are trying to offer solutions for a sustainable housing over the Amazonia to preserve the landscape and the resources over there, and to defend and empower people that lives in the Amazonian basin. And then that is my my lifetime goal, to create demo sites, call it Green Fab Labs, in Latin American countries and also in the North. So that is my work right now. That is the only thing that I do, full-time job. And yeah, it is very interesting to know that what we were saying like 5 or more years ago now is pressing, and now is, you know, giving us the perfect timing to deploy our projects. That is because we have a lot of catastrophes, incoming catastrophes. The pandemics was just a little sign about that, and we need to prepare for that. So why is we are preparing resilient and self-sufficient strategies for that matter?
Thank you, Marco. I'm happy to hear that we've got someone from Bolivia. Actually, I have an uncle that worked out there for an extended period of time, and now there's an education center that is to his name because of the work that he's done, ecological work actually, up in the plateaus of Bolivia. But thank you for joining us, and what you bring to the table links very well to what Sedalia was talking about earlier this morning. I don't know if everybody was there for the opening or the inauguration, but she was talking about, and so Sedalia is the elder that we had invited. She spoke about how we are having an impact on Mother Earth and how we need to really kind of examine ourselves and the damage that we are doing to Mother Earth, which ultimately is damage to ourselves. And some people may agree or disagree, but ultimately when we're seeing pandemics like this one, you kind of have to start wondering a little bit, what are those links and how are we linking those together? Is there a link to be done? I think we've got Louis, who cannot unmute, unfortunately, but I'm happy that you're here. He is from, can somebody help me say this one? I cannot pronounce this. Quetzaltenango. Go. Guatemala. I'm terribly sorry. My Spanish is absolutely horrible. I am somebody who hasn't learned many languages, and I haven't even learned Michif. It's something that I'm working on. I'm learning some words in Algonquin right now. So eventually, hopefully, I'm going to add another language to my belt. But right now, I'm French and English only, unfortunately. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about, or wanted to offer that we talk about, I had sent out an email asking if there were things that we wanted to bring up for Fab 16. And I think some of the comments were around how do we create this network, and how do we find a way to stay in touch with one another going forward, and kind of what would we like to see coming from this network. So that's definitely something that we can talk about. Something else that was brought up was finding ways to collect data on countries, Indigenous peoples, and the Fab Labs around the world, which I think can be part of the wish list for the network. And then we talked about discussion around appropriate technologies. So I think this was about, I'm not too sure if I'm representing this properly, but discussion around appropriate technologies. How do we, as Indigenous Fab Labs, bring in these technologies, and how do we use them to craft our traditional materials? And then Marco is, yeah, I'm kind of repeating what you've just posted, actually, Marco. Thank you. So yeah, and then there was a potential conversation around project ideas for self-sustainable, self-sufficient villages and communities. And going back a little bit to the discussion around technologies, what are ethical, cultural integration of modern and traditional technologies? So again, we're bringing back that question of which technologies and how to use them. And then lesson sharing, basically what advice do we have for new Indigenous Fab Labs, and what are some of the best practices that we've come about. So I've just given you a bit of a laundry list of suggestions. Is there anything in particular you would like to discuss? Because this is our circle. This is up to us to decide what we want to do with this time. I don't have a set agenda, I'll be honest. I thought that it would be best if we came up with what we want to talk about, and how we want to use this next 40 minutes together.
I guess I came with the thought to talk about how to hear how other people are approaching it, because I kind of exist, it's actually a bit outside of Fab Lab. It exists in our university, but I frequent it for my own education and awareness, but also with the idea of, as an educator, trying to draw my Indigenous community into that space, but also for them to identify how they can start their own space. So it's like I want it to be self-perpetuating and growing. So, and if there's a really wonderful crew there that supports that process. So maybe it's a roundabout way of saying, like, you know, how do we make these spaces more Indigenous, or make Indigenous spaces in Fab Labs or of Fab Labs? That's just one thing I was thinking of.
I think that's a really interesting question. I am working with the Fab Lab Abenaki in Gatineau. That was one of our questions, was how do we create these Fab Labs? How do we make them self-perpetuating? And how do we bring them into communities that actually need them, and not just urban centers? And how do we share the knowledge that comes from Indigenous Fab Labs? what do you think? Can we maybe tackle this big question?
I think Super Marcos have a lot of ideas.
Could you
Maestro
please
Marcos.
repeat the question? I received just a call, so it is some noise here. Could you?
Sure. And Hemi, please feel free to add or correct me, redirect, should I be misrepresenting here. We were talking about the idea of education through Fab Labs and creating self-perpetuating Fab Labs where people can bring them back to their community and grow their own Fab Labs within their communities so that they are where they need to be and not just in urban centers, which is where we're finding a lot of Fab Labs at the moment. And how to then take these Fab Labs that are dispersed throughout our nations and share that knowledge through these Fab Labs. Did I get that more or less correct? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I could say something about that, but previously I need to say an idea that was on our discussions lately, and it's about intergenerational approach. Because what we see is that people at Fab Labs just have a very short amount of time, especially when the Fab Labs are university Fab Labs, right? So their contact with the Fab Labs is just related to the periods of time that they are at the university, and then they, quit, they graduate and lose the contact with the technology. So that's it. There is no real transfer of technology to them. And then it is another issue, is that mostly of that universities comes from urban areas, not rural areas. So this situation configures some sort of exclusiveness. It is for the people that has a way to pay university, a way to live in urban areas. So the main idea is how we approach an inclusiveness Fab Labs for the people that lives in rural areas or indigenous communities. So that is key. From that, we could, define a lot of critical pathways, or define methodologies, or define what is needed in a short period of time, what is needed in medium period of time, and in the long term. And maybe it is interesting to discuss first in the long term. I mean, the intergenerational approach, because it is not that we need to educate our child better. We need to create an environment that will empower not only them, but the whole community for now and the decades of centuries from now. Because it is a sociological issue that people, when they become professionals, they become very competent with tools, with technology. It is something that happens. They abandon the family and they go, overseas. They go to Paris, they go to Germany or whatever, and the community in the roots continue to be poorer. So we need a way to, create the value, create the ways to empowering people with technology and how to deploy that scheme in order to reproduce in a synergistic and cooperative way with other Fab Labs around, and not only in the same country, but in the neighbor's country, in a regional approach, you know? So that is an initial fire ideas that I put on the table.
I mean, I'm hearing universities and from Hemi and Marco, and you know, honestly, I've been thinking about this a bit. It's how we depend on these very Eurocentric type of institutions, like universities, like museums, like galleries, which is where I work. So I think that even the fact that access to Fab Labs are in universities, are in these Eurocentric spaces, might actually play a role in how we see ourselves in that space and how we can bring that back to our communities. I don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, and if you're seeing this in a different way, but thinking about how can the knowledge that I acquire in a university context in this European style teaching help my non-European style community, my native community, might be a little hard to translate. And that might be a question that we need to look at, is how do we translate this information? How do we actually make it accessible from these Eurocentric institutions towards communities where everybody has access to that knowledge, and that it's shared in a way that is inclusive and available to everybody. Has anybody else seen these types of challenges within their own communities?
Yeah, I think one level of impact is how could we transfer this knowledge? How could we support communities to, for example, get access to new technologies, etc.? This is one level, no? I mean, this is a level of consumer of technologies. But in a deepest level is how could we empower local communities to develop new technologies with a new vision? For example, if we talk about the future of artificial intelligence, it's very different. It's very different, the knowledge or the sense of intelligence or creativity or connection with nature that could really improve or could really contribute with a global notion of the more academic circuits that could be really put on the table a new perspective of what we understand about this kind of technology. If we talk about, for example, self-assembled machine, another huge topic in the science field, yeah, learn from nature, learn from the notion of cycling that we have inside the life of the indigenous community also could be a really huge contribution. New materials, biomaterials, etc. All this process. What is happening today is local communities are not interested too much in develop that because they are in a more or less survival mode. I am talking in the Amazon context, no? Because yeah, the most of the people have to survive because the value for their products is very low. No? It's because, of course, they have not the opportunity to add values to this amazing biodiversity, for example, that they have. So the most of the economical activities in the Amazon are extractive. They take the wood, the minerals, the gold from rivers, etc. And also we have another kind of problems like narco-terrorists, etc. All these, or the main of these activities are extractive and predative activities. So I agree with Master Marcos, no? How could we generate a new kind of economy, a green economy, or a generative regenerative economy where the preservation or the empowering of the biodiversity could bring local communities the opportunities to get more benefits in this global economy. This is a key part, because if we don't generate these opportunities, people will say, as my father, for the education of their kids, he had to cut many trees, and he had to do agriculture. Not because he is bad or he is not sensible with the nature, it's because they need it and they have not more opportunities. So I think this is one key, how from new technologies and these global communities, we could contribute with, for example, alternatives for a regenerative economy in this kind of context. And in the opposite way is what kind of knowledge we could incubate in this from these indigenous communities that could contribute not as a periphery, but as central of the science and technologies in the future of these fields.
Yeah, I could add something. Let's say that we need to understand first approaches to a generative plan, a master plan, a big master plan in the Amazonia. Why? It's not because there is 5 or 6 countries involved. It's not because there is some, some indigenous communities that lives over there. It is not about some biodiversity issues on the Amazonia. No, it is not just about that. It is about the planet. It is about the whole organism that is our planet. And the Amazonia basin is absolutely key for the regeneration of the whole planet. We cross the line. We are in a tipping point where there is no return about that. We are, incoming catastrophes are every day. So I could dare to say that Fab Labs are quite obsolete. Why am I saying that? Because what we produce is teeny objects that has a very life cycle, a short life cycle, and then it becomes waste. And the waste and all that waste just is a way to pollute our earth. So what we need is to create Fab Lab that is capable and has the appropriate technology in order to create objects that are durable, that are sustainable, and that will be in the hands of the people that really need. And it is the kind of technology that will make sense with the needs that is most pressing right now. So it is very different to approach a Fab Lab in German or in USA. We need to define ways to improve our quality of water. We need food. We need different needs. So, and our people, the indigenous communities, the most poorer people in Latin America needs this kind of empowerment. So what we need is a way to redefine the Fab Labs in a greenest way possible. And of course, we don't need to just resign the technologies like artificial intelligence or biotechnology or synthetic biology. It is not that those are so complex that it is not for us. What we need is just appropriate technology that is small and that is all what we need. I don't agree with that situation. We think that it is needed to approach both technologies in a synergistic way. And for example, I could say that a Fab Academy that are focused on these matters, these existential solutions, will be more useful for us than just offer a curriculum where the people know, 10 machines and how it works. So if we talk about an agenda for the Indigenous Cycle, my first proposal could be to create a curricula for a Green Fab Academy, for example, that takes into account all the really needs learning objects that our people needs in order to create resilience after all, before all.
You talked about food sovereignty and access to clean water, and it's actually an issue that we have here in Canada as well. There's a certain number of First Nations communities that don't have access to clean drinking water, which is something that is mind-blowing when you actually think about it. And I can speak to a reserve and reserve is where the government created a space, a territory, to limit movement of Indigenous peoples. So they basically created these circumferences, these territories, and said, this is where you're going to live now, to Indigenous people in Canada. And so I can speak to a community that lives about an hour and a half away from the capital of Manitoba, Winnipeg, where they are now landlocked. They have no bridge or access to land up until, I think they finally built a bridge last year. They're landlocked because the government flooded the area, created a reservoir of water right around on that land. And this reservoir of clean drinking water is going to Winnipeg provides water to Winnipeg, whereas that community itself doesn't have clean drinking water. It is insane. It is mind-blowing. It is incomprehensible how this could happen, especially in Canada. We call ourselves developed, but at the same time, we've done incredible harm to our Indigenous communities by creating these policies and these situations where they find themselves where they don't have food sovereignty, they don't have access to food or clean drinking water. So that's definitely something that I'm hearing is a common issue. And we're also talking about, I like your comment about the Fab Academy, where, do we need another machine that does music? Yes, music is amazing. It's great. It helps us connect. But at the same time, a lot of us are actually dealing with some real urgent issues where we can't actually live comfortably because we're always working to try to get some food. We're always working to try to get some water. We're always working to ensure sustainability and that our space is safeguarded, right? Thinking about some territories where pipelines are being put down in Indigenous territories. There's Indigenous communities that are actually at the forefront trying to stop that from happening. How do we grow when we're constantly having to just survive? So what I'm hearing, Marco, is kind of a little bit of that step of going beyond surviving and actually thriving. And how we can do that through Fab Academies, through shared knowledge, through intergenerational sharing, and bringing our solutions that we gather from universities into our communities. Another huge challenge. Infrastructure.
Yeah, a little word about what you already said that is totally important, and it is the main subject of the whole event, Fab 16. because the title of the Fab 16 is about the commons, right? And the commons is about water, air, fresh air, you know, the clean environment and all that stuff. So how do we manage common goods? You know, from Elinor Ostrom to present days David Bollier or a lot of other authors, there is a lot of reflection about that. And we need to focus in context of this theory, what are the tools that are really needed, okay? So in parallel of this event right now, the Indigenous Circle right now, we are approaching a event next Thursday that is called Make Things Make Sense and Make Shifts. And what is about this event? We invite the most interesting and most high profile thinkers and makers in order to discuss what is the emergency tools that we need to create. We are talking what if scenarios. For example, there is a flood and a whole community disappear in a matter of 10, 15 minutes. How to rebuild that community from scratch? Which tools do we have in hand? Which tools do we can create in order to rebuild this community? So some people says, oh, you are in a post-apocalyptic scenario. Maybe you are watching a lot of TV, and it is not like that fact. We are approaching these catastrophic scenarios right now in different parts of this world. So we need to understand how to tackle that situation. And for example, we found that Lewis Darnell has a very interesting research about that. And we're going to publish the whole presentation from this morning, 3 a.m. That Lewis gave us. And then it's a logical sequence from Lewis Darnell and then Marcin Jakubowski, who creates 40 machines to rebuild the civilization from scratch, to reboot the civilization from scratch, right? There is a link between them. And then comes Vinay Gupta, who has a lot of experience, like 20 years of experience, you know, working in favor of the people that are as refugees and that, you know, are suffering very inhuman conditions by being expulsed from their communities because they are climate refugees, they are political refugees, etc., etc. So these three thinkers, for example, give us a lot of insights of what kind of appropriate technologies we need to put in our curricula in the Green Fab Academy, for example, or you could call it in another way, no need to be Green Fab. It is needed a new curricula that is different from Fab Academy, and that has in consideration all these technologies and tools in context with common goods and the ways to preserve and protect our environment.
I think that's really, really interesting. I really like the idea of exploring a new type of Fab Academy that would offer resilience to communities rather, and allow us to bring those back to the communities. I am just noticing that we have Walter and Claude who've joined us, and I'm just wondering if Walter and Claude, you'd mind taking a moment to introduce yourself, please. I'm putting you guys on the spot, I know that, I'm sorry.
Oui, bonjour, je suis Claude Gagné, je suis d'Ottawa et bon, je m'intéresse au mouvement Fab Lab depuis très longtemps et oui, on est très préoccupé par la résilience des communautés autochtones dans la région. Merci.
Merci.
Maestro Walter.
Yeah, exactly. I think the community already knows you, Walter, but I'd love to hear you speak.
Yeah, there he is.
Hey, un saludo acá de Perú. Dreaming as free. A ver, it is a future, I need you at future. Future. I love you, los amo a todos. A ver, ¿quién me hace translator? Estoy acá conectado desde la uni. Un saludo para todos, los he estado escuchando. No he entendido todo, pero sí algo así sobre el tema de lo que están hablando, ¿no? Hoy sobre las artesanías y todo el drama al que se enfrenta. Pero un saludo de Perú. Un abrazo, los amo a todos.
Gracias, Walter. Hace tiempo que no te veo, amigo.
Qué alegría verte.
Hola, mira. Dios mío, no puede ser. Ya me toca ir a Bolivia otra vez. Si no vas a Bolivia, tú vienes a Perú. Oye, claro. Un saludo a todos. ¿Cómo están por allá? Uy.
Bueno, no quiero comentar cómo estamos por acá. Está muy complicada la cosa.
Ah, sí, ya me imagino. La política siempre era así. Pero bien, estamos acá con el gran Beno también, con Ariane Muliar, ¿está bien dicho? Ya.
Ariane Muliar.
Sí, un saludo para todos. Acá más bien los invito para nuestro evento que vamos a hacer el día... ¿Cuándo va a ser esto? El 10. No me queda bien la hora, pero vamos a hablar sobre el libro que acabamos de publicar con todos los... participantes, ¿no? Y no sé si Benito puedes ayudarme. Ahí está, ¿no? Es el libro, ¿no? Más bien, si me envían sus direcciones para enviarle a sus respectivos países el libro en físico y si me mandan sus correos por intermedio de Benito, yo podría también enviarles la versión digital. Sí. No sé cómo...
mío.
¿Aló? Todos totalmente invitados al día 10, ¿no, Benito? Benito, no sé qué hora es en Perú o cómo se están manejando los horarios.
Cristina, tal cual. Sí, maestro, you have the book in your hand. Yeah, Walter said that if you want the book, please write me or write Walter. He is happy to share the link with you, the PDF. If you want this is an amazing book. We have here Jean-Luc too, Walter, and a lot of people. I don't know how many writers do you have. ¿Cuántos escritores hay, Walter?
25.
25.
25, ¿no? 25.
Yeah, we have a lot of people here. Yeah, it is the new baby of Walter. Yeah.
Dile que nos envíen su dirección de su casa para enviarles el físico del libro.
If you want the physical book, he can send you. Please write him, and yeah, or maybe you could put your email or I don't know, through the platform of the
address, ¿no? Su dirección de su casa para enviarle vía correo Serpost o DHL, no sé, cómo yo se lo envío.
Perhaps we could put the link in the chat. Yeah, that'd be helpful. And I'm just looking at the time and there's only 20 minutes left. I'm just
Está en inglés y castellano, dile, ¿no? Para que lo...
Sí,
en
no te
English.
preocupes. Ya estamos con el tiempo, ya estamos con el tiempo.
Ya. Ok, listo. Gracias.
I'm thinking perhaps we could discuss how we want to continue the conversation. What would be the best tools that we can use to come together and continue working on the various discussions that we've had. I've taken notes and I'll be watching our video later on. If everybody is okay with this, I would like to share what I'm gathering from this discussion with Fab Foundation to see how they can support us in creating a movement that is more durable, that will last, and that where we can come together on a semi-regular basis at least and continue these conversations, continue working together to resolve some of these challenges that we're all facing. Because from the sounds of it, it's no matter where you are in the world, we are all faced with very, very similar situations, similar challenges. So I think it's really important for us to be able to stay in contact and continue working together. So I suppose I asked about 3 or 4 questions all in once and didn't give anybody the chance to answer. So let's go. Let's just, if you can give me a thumbs up or a nod, are we okay if I share some of this information with the Fab Foundation? Are we all comfortable with that? Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I also love the idea of the Academy of Indigenous or something like that. I think this is a good way to continue producing this movement.
Absolutely. I also heard, I think it was Marco that mentioned something about having a center of science and technology or Indigenous science and technology, having a mastermind space where we can continue evolving these ideas might be really interesting as well. And that might be part of the Fab Academy. And perhaps we need to find another name beyond Fab Academy to propel these conversations.
I could name Julia Watson's book as an introduction to major technologies, indigenous technologies that are bigger, and that could enable very wider transformations in the rural areas or indigenous communities. We invite her, but she is with a newborn, so she can't attend our invitation. But her work is about how to understand the technologies that comes from remote areas of the world that are indigenous, but that has a lot of harmony with the environment. And it is not technology that is destructive, that destroy the nature, that contaminates the nature. And they live for centuries or for millennia in that way. So we need a lot to understand and a lot to learn from there. And it is not something that you could say, this old technologies, yes, just for some coffee with archaeologists. It is not like that. It is present technology. So we need a retrofuturist approach. Okay, so for example, in my country, we have an archaeologist named Condarco, and Condarco talks about the way that different ecosymbiotic landscape work together in order to create abundance. And it is not that you, for example, will try to get some grapes, and you can't because it is not the season for grapes. So in that scenario, in pre-Hispanic historical Andean countries, we used to have a full-time abundance because of this way to to cultivate our crops, right? So starting from this kind of approaches, which is agroecology approaches, we could do a lot of beneficial of the restoration, the regeneration of our lands.
I'm seeing some shares for books and some reading material. I am going to save the chat and share those links with you all afterwards to make sure that we all have a copy of those links. So the next question that I had was, how do we move forward from here? How do we stay in contact? Is that something that is desirable, that we continue these conversations? And what kind of tools would we like to see to continue these conversations?
Periodicity.
We could create a group in Wiki Factory.
Wiki Factory.
And yeah, what do you
It would
say,
be my
Christina?
pleasure. Oh, it would be an absolute honor. Absolutely. I'll be happy to set a base up. We also have a forum where we'd be able to maybe share links, but also then reference projects. I'll be super happy to also connect maybe some existing projects that really are focused on resilience, especially to kind of build what is already there. I would be super happy to do that. It would be an absolute delight. Only if it, and then build from there, or only if it can be of service, of course.
Super. And if you want, I could also organize, I don't know, a session for this academy, the Academy of the Indigenous. I think it will be great. We are doing that with another fields, for example, with ethics, inclusion, and diversity. It works very, very well because we start to invite people, propose some topics connected to technology and the culture, local cultures, etc. And we could, create a program together. I think it's a huge, it could be a huge impact. No?
About that, I could add a little question that is big in the impact, okay? What is about? It's about certification, okay? So a lot of people here in my country don't want to pay $5,000 for getting a diploma, which is just, which has a lot of value, yes, but it is not that, doesn't have a value for his work here because it is not with homologation with local universities and the local system. So what we need is, first of all, to have, let's say, a Fab Academy, Bio Academy, or a Fab Academy certificates that really works with local and national ways to certification, right? And people will be eager to pay $5,000, but if they receive a master diploma, which has at the same time MIT certification, Fab Foundation certification, I mean, and then the local universities. That is something that will work better for them because it allows them to get jobs, and they need jobs. But if they're going to pay $5,000 for a certification and that diploma will not be useful for them, it is not something that tackle their needs, right? So it is very interesting if we could create just a task force focus on this kind of solution, the certification issue. And we could not only get support from major institutions that could incentivize people that really wants to to show their will to study, and they offer, the good records, or they offer prototypes in contests about innovation, sustainable innovation, for example, and then they are the winners of that contest and get sponsor grants for continue to study in a Fab X Academy.
That's
so
true.
we need to mix half the price of that Fab X Academy could comes from their packets, and half could be a way to incentivize with donors or with agreements with universities. In that way, we could get an inclusive approach for a lot of people, not only for students in urban areas, but in rural and in the indigenous areas.
I 100% hear you, Marco, in having, the Fab Academy or Academy certification recognized by universities, or at least by funders or sponsors, people who can help pay for students to be there. Right now, if you're looking for a grant of any sort, or you're looking for a scholarship, it needs to be at a recognized institution. And I don't believe that the Fab Academy is part of those. What I'm also hearing is we could be looking at also creating a program through Fab Academy or Academy. I'm confused about which one's which now. Too many academies of sorts. There's a Fabric Academy as well, or something. So if we can look at like creating a program within the greater programs or institutions that could actually benefit our Indigenous pupils or communities. So I'm hearing those two things. And within those programs, we might be looking at how to create a program to help Indigenous people bring back Fab Labs into their own communities, and how these Fab Labs can help propel these communities in problem solving, in fixing things that they need to fix in their own communities. Am I hearing this pretty okay? Is this a little bit what we're looking at right now? Yes, no.
I think there's a level of I feel like rightly so, like there's the needs and priorities of the communities. I think we also have to have a discussion about how much work is being done on the other end to center consultation processes with communities. How does the curriculum through all of these academy classes, like how does that perhaps have considerations for affirming and not extracting technologies from Indigenous communities. So even if we were to have like a very specific Indigenous program, like we have to also deal with the power dynamics, and basically, like, I think one of the things that really drives me about this is how we have a problem that the social structures are not evolving at the level of at the rate of technology, but the hiccup in that, and probably more so by design, is that these systems are set up for extraction and diminishing of our ways of knowing. So how can we address that and affirm what we know and who we are through new programming?
Thank you so much, Janik, for that comment. I think you're right on the nose with that, where we are, process is extracting right now. It's extracting the knowledge and then using it in different ways elsewhere, and not affirming the knowledge, where it's coming from, who held the knowledge, who shared the knowledge, and then how do we reappropriate that for ourselves and say, this is our knowledge, this is how we do things. Being somebody who does facilitation, there's so many facilitation techniques that are actually very, very Indigenous in just the format and the way that conversations are flowing and everything. And I'm looking at these and I'm thinking, like, this is not a new process. This has existed since the beginning of time. We're just appropriating it from a people's and then calling it something new. So this is just in terms of facilitated process, but this happens also in technology. So I really appreciate that comment and that question about consulting with communities and reaching out to see what they need and how they can make use of the academy or the programs that are offered. It's definitely something that needs to happen before any structure is built. So we are coming up to 2:56. There isn't much time left. What I heard is that Christina is offering to create a Wikifactory group and forum for us to continue the conversation. What I have heard also from many of you was that email is also a great way of communicating. Perhaps if we can see if there's a way of hybridizing, is that a word? The Fab, the Wikifactory forum and email, so that the two can integrate with one another, might create a more diverse conversation, because I know that not everybody is using Wikifactory. So it's trying to reach out to those that are outside of this core group already and ensuring that they have a place for their voice. I don't know if there's any way of doing that, Christina, but maybe we can have that conversation later on.
Absolutely. I think that would be really important. I think maybe the forum might serve to kind of publish things where others can also have access to it that email provides. But I completely agree, for the free flow of the conversation, being able to bring people on board, it makes a whole ton of sense. It would only to be inclusive, and I'm be happy to, on the basis of what we have shared today, show how I would best make use of our tools, and then you can see how it falls short or it can be built upon in the best of ways.
Perfect. I'm happy to hear that. Any last comments? I don't know if we're going to be cut off completely exactly at 3. So I'm just warning you, I don't know how this Zoom ends. So we only have a minute left. So any last comments?
I try to write it down, some kind of synthesis on the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll send the chat to everybody, some of these highlights. So thank you, Marco. Jean-Luc, did you have a last couple of things to say?
No, just appreciation before we get cut off for all the time spent today with family. So really happy to see all of your faces.
Likewise, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. It's been a great conversation. It's been a pleasure having this first conversation with everybody. I really appreciate being able to come together and share our collective story.